Right, guys. So, good morning and welcome again to our session today on feeds, feeding, and harvesting. Yeah. So basically, these are some of the different topics we will cover in today's lecture. So, choice of feed, main nutritional components of aqua feed, right? And we will specifically go a bit into protein requirements. We wouldn't go into all the different components, right? So when we cover in protein requirements, we touch a bit on amino acid requirements like protein sources, right? Which is very important, right? Because as you know, or may not know, the protein source that we actually use to make aquaculture feed is primarily fish meal, right? And this has consequences, environmental consequences, because of the fact that this fish meal is sourced from the fisheries sector, right? So they actually capture fishes to process to develop fish meal to be used as aquaculture feed. And this is not really a sustainable, there's not a sustainable way of producing a protein source for aquaculture feed. However, there are alternatives that we could capitalize on, right? Such as protein sources from plant material or plant sources. But in addition to that, there's something new that and emerging all around the world where they're using insect protein now. Yeah. So protein from insects to actually manufacture aquaculture feeds. And there is a current project that is carded to begin here in Trinidad, where we will be using insects to develop feeds for animals, livestock feed, including aquaculture feed. And it is more or less funded, I should say, by the FAO in collaboration with some other leading organizations around the globe. And it will most likely be conducted at the university field station. So we will have the pilot project set up here. So that's something to look forward to as well. So we could always keep in touch in case anybody wants to kind of be part of the project, and we'll have different things going on with that, right? So that's just something to bear in mind, right? So protein sources again is a very important topic, right? So again, there's animal protein sources, plant protein sources, right? So we'll cover a bit into dietary lipid requirements, carbohydrate requirements, but not so much. So we won't get too much into depth into those. We will cover feeding methods, regimes, and other practices, right? So how it is we feed our fish or aquatic species is another area that we need to cover as well, because depending on species and the type of organism, there are different methods by which and how we feed those animals. Yeah, because not everything feeds the same way. They wouldn't feed on the same type of feed. The manner in which we feed them and all to needs to vary. Yeah. We would also cover a bit on feeding tilapia. So we will go into a basic feeding schedule for tilapia, because again, tilapia is one of the most common species utilized in aquaculture. And we will go a bit into feed conversion ratios, etc. Also, as part of this lecture today, we will also cover some harvesting techniques as well that we utilize in aquaculture. For fish feed, right? Why is fish feed even a topic, right? Because the growth and the feed required to sustain this growth is of major importance in aquaculture. You have to realize aquaculture production is based, the profitability of an aquaculture venture is based on being able to have a saleable product at the end of the day, right? And not just a saleable product, but you want to be able to put out a product on the market where your returns will be more than your expenses, right? And your expenses, primarily the major part of your expense in an aquaculture venture is basically feed, right? So you want to make sure that you feed the diet that you feed your fish or your aquatic species right, meets the requirement of that organism, so that they will put on the required growth. They will develop properly, so that you will actually be able to generate a fair enough sizable profit at the end of the day when you sell those organisms. So again, growth and the feed required to sustain this growth is of major importance in aquaculture. To improve productivity and profitability within this industry, we must provide feeds that supply adequate levels of energy and protein in order to sustain efficient growth. Again, it all comes back down to growth. We will cover a topic, something called feed conversion ratio, so FCRs, right? And it's something that's very important. It basically just in summary, a feed conversion ratio is really a ratio of how much feed you feed your animals, right? Or in this case, the fish, versus how much weight that the fish puts on, right? Because you don't want to be feeding more and spending more to feed your fish than you're getting in returns when you sell that fish. Yeah. So you want to make sure that whatever feed you feed your fish is converted efficiently into body mass, so that it could actually generate a profit as opposed to a loss when you sell those organisms. Right. So again, feeds come in different sizes, different shapes, different nutrient profiles. Again, yeah, different nutrient profiles depending on the type of species that it is growing. Yeah. So choice of feed. So criteria to consider when choosing a fish feed. Again, right, everything there with the asterisk is basically the nutritional composition of the fish feed. So things like proteins, you want to make sure that depending on the type of aquatic species or the stage of growth of that aquatic species, you have the required protein levels in that feed for that organism. So let me say, for instance, between crayfish and tilapia, right, the protein requirements for those two organisms will vary because they are two completely separate types of organisms with two different types of requirements. Now, let me look at just tilapia, for instance. Depending on the stage of growth of the tilapia, the protein requirements will also vary. So it will vary between species, right? And it will vary depending on growth stage or life stage of that particular species as well. So juvenile tilapia, for instance, will require higher diets with a higher protein content than as opposed to the latter stages of development. Yeah. So again, things like protein, lipids, carbohydrates, mineral content, vitamin content, etc., are all important components of fish food. Right. So again, some other criteria to consider when choosing a fish feed is presence of toxic and or anti-nutritional factors, the composition, storage characteristics is also very important. Some fish feed, you could basically just keep it at room temperature. Others you need to keep chilled. And again, there are other types that you need to keep refrigerated. Right. So again, storage characteristics plays a major is a major factor as well. Again, because of the fact that you need to make sure that you have the required storage conditions for that feed. Yeah. Pellet and handling characteristics, cost and availability, palatability to target. So you want to make sure when you feed your fish or your aquatic species that they actually eat it. Yeah. So palatability is a big thing, right? So even though, right, let me use an example. Like, let me say you have normal tilapia and you feed in tilapia one particular brand of feed. Sometimes if you change that brand, right, suddenly on the fish, they might not even eat it, right? Because the taste is different. So fish, just like any other organism, they have a sense of taste as well. And if the food is not palatable, they will not eat it. And again, they will not assimilate it and put on the desired weight that you're looking for. Remember, when you are in aquaculture production, you want to maximize, right, on the growth rate of your fishes, right? So it's very important that you feed them a high quality feed and they feed on that feed efficiently. Yeah. Again, in addition to that, consumer acceptance of the final product as well too. So depending on the feed that you're feeding the fish, All right, it could be a plus or a minus to you with respect to your consumers and if they're willing to purchase and consume your product. Yeah. The protein requirements. So proteins. So these are large complex molecules composed of mainly carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen with amino acid building blocks. Proteins are considered the most expensive dietary source in intensive culture, accounting for at least 50% of the overall feed cost. So the highest component in your feed cost is protein. Yeah. And again, protein requirements generally decrease with increasing fish size and age. So remember the example I gave you with the tilapia, and I said that the juvenile stages requires a higher protein content in the diet as opposed to the latter stages, right? So the protein requirement, again, that means it decreases as the fish gets larger, okay, and they go along in age. Um, Protein possesses both quantitative and qualitative aspects, and both are of importance. So protein serves three purposes in the nutrition of fish. It provides energy, it supplies amino acids, it meets requirements for functional proteins, enzymes and hormones and structural proteins, right? The requirement for protein in fish diets is essentially a requirement for the amino acids in the dietary protein. Okay? So these are just some examples of protein requirements recommended for tilapia, right? And these requirements basically revolve around optimizing them for growth and performance, right? So generally during larval stages, we want around 55% and up protein content in the food that we feed at that stage. For tilapia juveniles, which is a stage later down from the larval stage, the protein requirement drops slightly, around 45 to 50%. So we usually call these starter feeds, right? Adult tilapia, so when they get bigger and they kind of go more to the closer to harvest size, etc., we go down to around 30 to 40% crude protein in the diet. Yeah, so that's around grower and finisher feed, something we'll have around that. Brood stock, the tilapia that you're using to breed and produce your juveniles and your fingerlings for production, right? So those diets vary as well too with the protein content. And the protein content of broodstock feed is usually between 38 to 40%. Yeah. The photos to the right are just some examples of what these sizes of feed looks like. So, so basically, you can just see that it goes from very small and fine to slightly bigger to bigger. And again, while your fishes progress in size, the size of the feed also changes to match and suit that fish. Because if you have a large fish, it don't make sense to feed in it a very, very, very small pellet. Yeah, it's not suited, it's not suitable, it's difficult for the fish to consume. They have to consume a lot of it to basically consume anything significant to meeting the requirements for the diet, right? So you just basically match the size of the fish to the size of the pellet, so you use a much bigger pellets. Right, so this table that shows you some amino acid composition of feeds and some of what we term non-essential, semi-essential, and essential amino acids, right? You don't really need to know anything from this table for this course, right? But it's good general information. Essential amino acids. Basically, when we say essential amino acids, we refer to the amino acids that cannot be synthesized by living organisms and must be supplied in diets. Right, so organisms can produce amino acids, right? But essential ones they cannot produce; they have to consume it. Right, non-essential amino acids can be synthesized by the organisms in the presence of suitable materials. Yeah. So it's important to just differentiate the differences between both. So again, so protein sources, as I mentioned, could be animal-based or it could be plant-based. right? And this table basically just gives you a brief overview into animal protein and plant protein. So just to basically summarize, animal protein is a good and rich sources of protein, right? They have a good balance of essential amino acids, good mineral trace element levels, good digestibility, high palatability, good sources of lipid, generally expensive, and examples of animal protein include things like fish meal and animal product meal, right? Plant protein, they're not really as of good quality as the animal proteins, right? So it's often regarded as a poor source of protein. Essential amino acids are usually deficient. So normally you have things in there that are kind of something called anti-nutrients, right? So things like phytic acids, poor mineral bioavailability, etc. Often poor digestibility, right? Because they have a very high fiber content. Poor palatability, it don't really taste too good, so the fish don't really consume it that well. Poor sources of lipids, it's relatively inexpensive, but again, you know, being relatively honest, you had to think about cost benefit analysis here, right? Because you might pay less for it, but at the same time, if you're not getting the desired weight in your fish, then you're losing money because they wouldn't be able to earn the kind of profits you would usually get if you feed it a better diet, right? So sometimes that might cost them more in the long run as opposed to what you're saving in terms of the cost of the feed. Right. So examples are oil seeds, soybean, cereals, algae, aquatic macrophytes, things like duckweed, azolla, water hyacinth, etc. Right. So this table basically just highlights some protein sources for fish diets. Right. So when I send these slides to you all, you can take your time and you can go through them, see the different components like crude protein, fat content, ash content of different types of feedstuff like blood meal, canola oil, cottonseed meal, fish meal, those types of things. So feed and methods. So depending on the diet and the feed form, right? So you have two types of feeds used in aquaculture. Right? So diet and feed forms. Two types of feeds used in aquaculture, natural live feeds, right? And you have artificial meal and crumbles. And then you have things like pellets, right? So basically you have natural foods and that are mostly live, like brine shrimp and those things. Those are natural live feed. And then you have artificial feed, the ones that we manufacture. We go out in the garden shops and the pet shops and the agro shops, and we purchase in the pellet form for the aquatic species. So feed and methods for artificial feed forms. There are two primary ways in which we feed fish, right? Fish food, which is by hand feeding, right? So small scale farms are utilize a lot of hand feeding, right? So it allows the feeder to regulate the amount of feed. It prevents overfeeding because you could observe the fish behavior and you could feed as needed, right? The other alternative or the other way in which we feed, or the other method of feeding fish, is by using automatic feeders, something called demand feeders, right? They also refer to it as blower feeding. So there are different pieces of equipment you could utilize that will automatically feed your fish for you. These feeders sometimes work on a timer. So it will come on at a specified time. It will, let me say, a valve will open, a certain amount of food will fall out, it will close back. Others, such as demand feeders, are designed in such a way that the fish can actually trigger a little trigger that you have inside of the water. And every time they trigger it, fish food will fall into the water and they will feed on it. The fish actually learns this behavior. So whenever they're hungry, they will actually trigger that demand feeder to release feed into the water. Okay? So that is also something that a lot of aquaculture farmers utilize as well too. Yeah. So those are used more on larger farms because when you have real large farm facilities, it's very difficult for one person or even two persons, etc., to feed that entire facility. So those facilities are retrofitted with automatic feeders, demand feeders, etc. So it reduces the labor that is needed to be able to sufficiently feed all those species or all those fishes. So feeding regimes and practices. So feeding levels, the quantity. You can feed ad lib, meaning you feed within a specific duration as much as the organism will consume. In the ornamental industry, we utilize this technique quite often. When we look at our aquarium or we look at a normal fish pond with koi's, etc., we typically don't get an average of the body mass of all those fish. We don't weigh, we feed and feed based on the total biomass in the system, etc. What we usually do is that we go to those enclosures, we take some fish feed and we throw it in the water, right? When we throw it there, the fish will eat and you just throw a little bit at a time. Typically, the general rule of thumb is that you feed fish as much as they can eat sufficiently within 5 minutes. If so let me just assume, let me just explain this further. So let me say you have an aquarium and you're feeding your fish in your aquarium. You have, let me say, 10 goldfish, 5 guppy, and 2 koi. So you're feeding them fish in the aquarium. So you're feeding them ad lib. So you basically take your fish food, you pour a little bit in the water, and you start to feed them. Right? So the fish eating. So you add a little bit to eat, you feed them a little bit, you feed them a little bit, you feed them a little bit. If you realize they put the food, and after 5 minutes, they're no longer eating that food anymore, it is assumed that the fish has reached satiation, meaning the belly full, right? So they will not feed any further. So the general rule of thumb is in the ornamental industry especially, is that we don't feed fish more than what they could eat within 5 minutes. If the fish food is remaining in that water beyond 5 minutes, it's a good indication that you're overfeeding now. If you feed the food and you eat it out within that 5 minute period, you're good. If anything remains floating, it's not good. So what I typically do, right? I mean, it's difficult. Like, let me say, you get a new batch of fish. You really can't tell how much a fish go and eat. So I will come and I will feed my fish for within that 5 minute period, and I'll just have an average of how much I put in. And whatever remains after that 5 minutes, I will immediately remove it from the water. Because if that feed remains uneaten, it will decompose and it will foul your water conditions or your water quality, right? So it's always best to remove it. And next time around, I have a better idea on how much you will eat within that 5 minutes, right? And after you do that a couple of times, you know exactly how much you put in. So you didn't have to wait around for 5 minutes. You just pour some, and I mean, and once the fish start to feed, you could almost be certain that they're going to eat that out within that 5 minutes, right? The other methods in which you feed your fish is by feeding based on a certain percentage of the fish body weight or a percentage of the entire biomass of your system per day. This is very important when you're dealing with aquaculture for food production, right? Because basically when you're dealing with food fish or food species, your primary purpose and your primary goal is to get that organism to put on maximum weight, right? However, you don't just want to be randomly feeding your fish. It's a business you're running here. And your profitability is dependent on your final biomass, because your final biomass will dictate how much money you're going to make when you sell it, because you're selling by weight, right? So with respect to that type of production, you could, for each particular commercial aquaculture species, research would have already been done into what percentage body weight you need to feed that fish at the different life stages. So that is already worked out. And that is one criteria for selecting a species for aquaculture. You want to make sure that these things are already established. So you as an aquaculture farmer can basically set up your business plan and know, well, it is expected that my tilapia will have a 6-month growth period. Within the first month, I will feed it crumble. Within the next 2 months, I will feed it starter. Within for the last 3 months, I will feed it a grower ration. I would feed it 10% of the body weight within the first month, 8% within the second and third month, and 3 to 4% within the last 3 months. Then I could come back now and calculate how much weight of food is 2%, is 3%, is 8%, is 10%. And then I could translate that into what it will cost me. So that way I could work up my entire business plan and know exactly how much I feed in my fish, the quantities of feed I feed in my fish from start to harvest, and my expected weight. So that way I could sit down and I could calculate and say, hey, if I grow in 500 fish in this tank, I'm going to get a biomass of 1,000 pounds at the end of 6 months. It's going to cost me $495.62 to produce, because that's how much it, based on my feeding schedule, are going to cost me in feed. And as a minus my expenses from my my gross income, and I could determine my net profit. And that's how you do aquaculture as a business. So feeding is, understanding feeding regimes is very important, because again, feed is one of your primary cost factors in production, right? So having your thumb pinned on that and knowing everything, all the inputs fit, is very important. Yes, so this is where the daily feeding as percentage body weight comes in. So you could calculate and determine all of these things while you go along. Feeding frequency. This also changes depending on the size of your fish as well too, and between species of your fish too. So feeding frequency. Sometimes you could feed fish once a day. You could feed fish twice a day, right? So Siobhan, I know you use a lot of kois. Now, kois and goldfish don't typically have a true stomach, right? Meaning they don't really store food in the gut or in the stomach as how other fishes will store food. So that's why you would see goldfish kind of num 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 num. There's people who's kind of, they had an analogy for goldfish because they're always at the surface, right? Because they can't store food in the stomach, any large quantities. That is, the stomach is empty very often during the course of the day. So with goldfish hunting, it is recommended that they feed them multiple times during the day, simply because they can't store food, right? Or they can't store it as good as other species. Other species, however, better at storing food, so you may feed them once, twice, 3 times daily, dependent. And again, depending on the stage of growth of the fish, juveniles especially need frequent feeding, right? So you feed them more times per day as opposed to the adult stages. Yeah, so these things again are worked out already for you once as I establish aquaculture species. And this is where aquaculture research and thing lies, and really understanding and researching and putting these kind of information out there. So let me say, for instance, you want to do I know you all choosing an aquaculture species to do for your project. And let me say you choose a species that is not commercially used in aquaculture. These types of information will be absent because nobody ever researched it before. So before the species can be put into commercial production, you will do feeding trials, and you will actually develop that feeding regime to understand at what stage you feed it, how much food, what quantity protein, etc. So these are the types of things that goes into aquaculture research. Yeah, so you can actually put new species out into the market, etc. Feeding level and frequency decreases as a function of fish size and age. So as the fish gets bigger and older, again, feeding frequency, etc., decreases. So the optimum interval between feedings is on average 4 to 5 hours, right? So within that time, the food that the fish consume has sufficient time to be assimilated by that fish and put into body mass, etc. Right? So with respect to feeding tilapia, with optimal temperatures, feeding rates depend on the fish size. So again, depending on the size of the fish, your rate of feeding will vary depending on that, as well as the density, how much fish you have in the tank. And that's an obvious thing. The more fish, the more food. Yeah. So optimal daily feeding rates for tilapia are as follows. So depending on the fish weight, right, we have a different feeding rate for that weight. So like let me say the fish is 1 gram, we will feed on average 11% of the body weight. 2 grams, 9%, 5 grams, 6.5, and you see how it goes, right? So the heavier the fish, the less percentage of the body weight you feed, yeah, all the way up to 1.5%, and that's almost at harvestable size, yeah. So feeding rate tables serve as a guide for estimating the optimum daily ration, but they are not always accurate under a wide range of conditions, such as fluctuating temperatures or dissolved oxygen. So again, water quality parameters and stuff will also affect the feeding of your fish, etc. Now, I told you poor water quality, a good initial sign of that is that the fish will go off feed, meaning they will not feed, or two, they will feed, but not feed as usual. So you will basically get a poor feeding reaction from the fish. They won't eat as much, they will be more sluggish at feeding time, etc. So all of these are good indicator that the water quality as well is off. Everybody follow me so far?
Yes, sir.
Okay, nice. So feed calculations. How do we calculate the amount of feed we feed our fish? And not, when I say fish, I mean all aquatic species. Eh? So to manage fish nutrition, the aquaculturist must make some calculations, right? So you must be able to calculate your weight of your fish, because depending on the weight of your fish, it will determine the entire biomass of your system. And we feed fish typically based as a percentage of biomass. Yeah, so you have some calculations, nothing rocket science, but you need to be mindful of the basic calculations. Specifically, aquaculturists need to calculate the amount of feed required, the amount of storage required, and finally the feed conversion ratio. So you want to be able to know how much, you don't want to set up an aquaculture facility and then you buy one bag of feed and then realize, hey, well, the fish needed 2 bags. Like you want to be able to calculate that ahead of time. And that is proper business planning. So you want to know how much feed is required. Then once you determine that, so let me say you have a large facility and you need 50 bags of feed, right? Per day. Now, there are large facilities that will use that amount of food, but you're not going to just buy food every single day of your life to feed your fish. So if you want to buy for a month in advance, 2 months in advance, you have to calculate how much bags that's going to be. And then based on that, you need to have proper storage for it. So storage facilities, etc., need to be put in place. So by knowing how much feed the fish will use, and how much you can consume, how much you have to buy, and then now you know how much you have to store. So you have to cater for space to store that food, right? And finally, the feed conversion ratio, right? So this could help you calculate your profitability, your profit and loss. Because if you calculate your feed conversion ratio, you will know how much feed will be utilized to produce X amount of weight at the end of the day. And then you could determine how much you're selling that fish for to basically cover the cost of the feed and to give you the profit that you're looking for. Yeah. So again, all of these calculations help determine an operation's profitability. The key thing with aquaculture production is to basically maximize on your profit. So feed requirements for fish change with age, size, health, and water conditions. Feeding charts are available for certain species of fish, such as tilapia, catfish, rainbow trout of different sizes and at different water temperatures. The following examples illustrate problems and solutions related to feed requirements. So we're going to do a little question here now, right? You take your time and read it. So the question is, a pond is stocked with 45,000 fish, right? So you have a pond and it's stocked with 45,000 fish. that weigh 50 pounds per 1,000 fish. So every 1,000 fish weighs 50 pounds. You have 45,000 fish in total, right? The desired feeding rate is 3% of their weight daily, right? How much feed is needed for 1 day and for 1 week? So let me just go back through this again. You have a pond, you have 45,000 fish on that pond. Every 1,000 fish weighs 50 pounds, right? So if you want to get the weight of 45,000 fish, and you know that every 1,000 fish is 50 pounds, you divide 45,000 by 1,000, right? You should get 45. And then you know that every 1,000 fish is 50 pounds, so it will be 45 by 50 pounds. Yeah. And that will basically give you your total weight of fish in that pond. Now you know your total weight, you have to determine now and calculate how much feed you're going to feed that fish. And your recommended feeding rate is 3% of their weight daily. So which means you're feeding 3% of that value, of that weight of fish. And when you calculate that, you will basically know how much you're feeding in a day. And then for 1 week, you multiply by 7. And you know how much you're feeding in a week. And then you multiply it by 4. And you know how much you're feeding in a month. So now you can calculate how much feed you're feeding your fish in total for the month. You can calculate how much money it's going to cost you. And then your average estimated projected weight you're going to get from your fish. And you can start to determine your profits from that enterprise. So let me go through this here now. So again, just to recap, your pond is stocked with 45,000 fish that weigh 50 pounds per 1,000 fish. The desired feeding rate is 3% of their weight daily. How much feed is needed for 1 day and for 1 week? So step 1, you have 45,000 fish. And every 1,000 fish weighs 50 pounds. So you divide 1,000 fish into, well, 45,000 fish by 1,000 fish and multiply by 50 pounds because every 1,000 fish weighs 50 pounds. And you're going to get 2,250 pounds of fish in total. So that 45,000 fish weighs 2,250 pounds, right? Okay. Repeat that. Good. Right. So basically, step 2 would have basically had right. So step 2 would have calculated for the day. Step 3 is for 1 week, right? So basically, this would have been how much you're feeding per day, 67.5 pounds, right? Because remember, all you had to do with this here, right? So remember, step 1, you calculate the total amount of fish stock, right? Total weight, which is 2,250 pounds. And they said the feeding rate is 3% a day, right? So all you do is find 3% of this, right? And this 3% is 67.5 pounds. So that is step 2. So you find how much you feed in a day. So it's 3% a day. So 3% of this weight. And that's how much it is, 67.5 pounds. And now they ask you for a week. So you multiply how much you feed in a day by 7 days. And it will give you 472.5 pounds. Yes, correct. Correct, Javez. That is correct. Yes, so it's 3% of this weight. Right? So you see as simple as that. So now you realize you're actually putting a little bit of more predictability into your aquaculture venture, right? Because you want, now let me tell you, you would not believe how much quote unquote commercial producers we have locally that does not do this, right? That I don't even know if they are aware of calculations like this, right? Some of them just randomly feed the fish based on how much they can eat, and it's end up in a mess because at the end of the day, they just feeding fish. They don't have a good tally on the records. They don't have a good feel on the cost of production, nothing like that. When you work it like this, you could basically determine, you could follow that business plan from start to end. Yes, yes, Anderson, that is so true. Buying in bulk is always better because it's cheaper. So again, instead of you going now, so as Anderson rightfully said now, and again, as a business owner, you have to see what is the most cost-effective situation for you. And I mean, you could purchase smaller quantities and purchase it more frequently, or you could basically bulk buy, and you could get your feed cost dropping because of the fact that you're buying, in larger quantities, etc. So all of these are good techniques to utilize to cut your cost in production. Wow. See that, Anderson? Yeah. So yeah, Anderson, I understand where you're coming from with that for sure, right? So Anderson, he started to bulk buy fertilizer at almost half the price. And when I started to build systems, right, like aquaculture systems, aquaponics, hydroponics for clients and things, I was heavily dependent on hardware. So I should basically go, depending on the project I had, I'll just go to the hardware and purchase the materials for those projects. And I did some pretty sizable projects. So usually I will go and the guys, they will give me a little discount and a 10% or 5% here, you'll take a little thing off. Until I registered an account with the manufacturers and I started to bulk buy, right? So just so you get almost half price on your fertilizers, PVC items. Let me just use an example. Next door by me has a relatively large hardware, and I used to pay $12 for a 2-inch T to build a system, a 2-inch PVC T, $12. When I started to buy directly in bulk buy, it cost me $3 and something cents, right? And that is the markup the hardware had on those items, right? So I mean that's ridiculous. From 3 something to like $12, and that's how much I was paying. And my cost now dropped significantly what it cost me to make a system. So what I do, most of the time I give my clients the system materials at a reduced cost. However, it's still a profit for me. So I now profiting from the cost of materials, and the clients are profiting as well because again, a better deal than if you just go to the regular hardware. So it's a win-win for everybody. Yeah, Jarvis, it's ridiculous, right? So PVC pipes and things, some hardware selling like a 2-inch and for $60. I used to get those for $30.50 or something plus VAT. So almost twice the price. 4-inch PVC pipes. That used to be like about what, $110, $115. Now it's about $145. But it's like about the average price then was about $110, $115. I used to get 4-inch for $60 plus VAT. But the price of everything going up now, like it's $80 plus VAT, but again, it went up proportionately in the hardware. So again, honestly, like I don't think it's real hard for me to just buy one fitting now in a hardware, knowing the prices and things. But again, just to support Anderson's comment of buying in bulk is always better. Yeah. And if anybody want PVC items and you need to get any sizable quantities or anything, you can let me know. I'll just buy it and you'll get it at a much reduced cost and hardware price. So feed conversion ratios. What is FCR? So the FCR is the ratio of the pounds gained by fish after consuming a known amount of feed. And feed conversion ratios are important for all livestock. It is something you will come across for poultry, for pigs, for beef, for almost everything. Out of all the different types of livestock, fish has one of the best feed conversion ratios, meaning you get a better turnover and body mass that is put on by those organisms per unit gram of feed fed as opposed to all other organisms. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One of the reasons is that fish are neutrally buoyant. So basically they actually the water column kind of supports the weight. So they don't need to expend energy to fight against gravity or anything like that. And because of that, they could utilize food more efficiently. So things like that actually allows fish to have a much better feed conversion ratio as opposed to other organisms. They're regulating the body temperature and thing too. They don't need to expend energy in doing that, right? As opposed to like warm-blooded, quote unquote, warm-blooded animals. If the place get too cool, your body need to heat up, and these things are energy intensive, and that energy is derived from food. And that food could have gone into body mass, but as opposed to going into heat, right? Fish don't need to worry about that. So again, they could utilize more of the food that they eat into weight, right? So these things account for the fact that, account for the reason of fish having a better feed conversion ratio. And so that's a real good thing. So we are one of the best with fish. So feed conversion ratios are calculated to determine the cost and efficiency of feeding the fish. FCRs are affected by the quality of feed, of course, size and condition of the fish, right? Number of good feeding days related to temperature and water quality and feeding practices. So let me say your water quality goes bad and your fish don't feed as efficiently as they would feed before. They don't feed as much as they would feed before, because one of the things that happens when water goes bad is fish just kind of go off the feed. They don't really eat much. That means the fish not going to put on that weight because they're not eating the food to support weight gain. So you want to make sure, that's why it's very important. You see how everything is tying to each other. So your water quality is very important, because they want to make sure that that quality of water is always at the optimum for that fish or that species, so that they will always feed and operate at the best performance. And that has a direct relationship into your profit and loss now, because it will affect how your fish assimilate the food you're feeding, which is a major input and a major expense on your part. So you want to be able to capitalize on that food as best as possible. So keeping good water quality, keeping the fish in good health, they're eating proper, they're putting on the proper weight, ensures your profitability. So feed conversion ratios for catfish, for example, could vary from less than 1.5 to as high as 4 or more. The higher the value, the worse it is. The lower the value, the better. Yeah? So 4 is not good. 1.5 is real good. Less than 1.5 is even better, but hard to achieve, but good. Right? So anything around a feed conversion ratio of 2, when you're dealing with aquatic species, you want to kind of keep it underneath that to really get the best value for the feed that you feed your fish. Yeah. So again, feed conversion ratios higher than 2 should be reduced. So to determine the feed conversion ratio requires records of the amount of food that is fed to the fish, the amount of fish that you lose via mortalities, etc., and the pounds of fish harvested, right? So fish losses, you need to account for that food that you feed your fish. Yeah. So if you lose fish, you're recording that, so you could minus it from the total, so you wouldn't do a miscalculation into what is really being converted. Yeah. So you need to know how much feed you're feeding your fish, and basically how much you're harvesting, taking into account if you lose anything. So the feed conversion ratio can be calculated monthly when fish are sampled and when fish are harvested. So usually in an aquaculture operation, we will do random sampling almost every month. So let me say you have a tank with 100 fish on it, tilapia. Every month you randomly, let me say you randomly select out 10 fish. So you just kind of dip your net around the tank. You take out you don't select, you just randomly take out 10 fish. You weigh them, you get the average. You determine the average weight or biomass of the tank. We just saw the calculation on how to do that before. And then based on that, you calculate how much feed to feed your fish. So you can adjust your feeding based on the biomass that is inside of your tank every month. So let me say this month here, right, today's the 1st, right? So let me say yesterday was the last day in the month. Well, actually, no, today's the 1st. So let's say ideally. So today's the 1st. So you weigh a fish today. You get average biomass and you feed 3% of that. Let's use an example. In a month time, you weigh a random 10 fish again. You get the average biomass. But you know the biomass is going to be more now because the fish would have gained weight. for this month. So now that 3% going to be more. So now you can recalculate at the end of the month and feed the fish the necessary adjustments to that amount of feed. So it might go up by about a pound, 10 grams, depending, right? So you feed accordingly. And then at the next month now, the following month, you weigh the fish again. You get an average of the total biomass. You may be feeding the same percentage body weight, but it's going to be more food now because it's 3% of a larger weight, yeah, or more weight. And that's how you go along in your production. So this is basically the formula for feed conversion ratio, right? So it's basically the total pounds of food that you feed the fish over the final weight of the fish, right? Which is the initial weight or weight gain between sampling periods. Okay? Example. About 67,500 fingerlings weighing 50 pounds per thousand fish was stocked in a pond. So every 1,000 fish weighs 50 pounds. You have 67,500 fish in total. Later, the fish was sampled and the average fish weight was found to be 0.25 pounds, right? Or if you look at it on a per 1,000 fish, it's 250 pounds per every 1,000 fish. So we know the initial weight, which is 50 pounds per 1,000 fish. We know the final weight, which is the latter weight, which is 250 pounds per 1,000 fish. So it went up from 50 pounds to 250 pounds. So this is the initial, and this is the final. So during this time, 10 tons plus 1,600 pounds of feed were fed to your fish, right? So you realize something here. They gave you the weight in two different units. 10 tons plus 1,600 pounds. Now, when we're doing calculations or we're doing weight calculations or any calculations, we always convert all the units into one common unit. So you can't put 10 tons, 1,600 pounds when you're doing a feed conversion ratio calculation. You have to convert, it's best to convert all into pounds. So basically, you convert 10 tons into the respective amount of pounds and you add it to the 1,600 because it's 10 tons plus 1,600. So you will get your total amount of pounds of feed that were fed. No fish losses were observed, so you don't need to cater anything for anything that was lost, right? What is the feed conversion ratio? So to recap, 67,500 fingerlings weighing 50 pounds per 1,000 fish were stocked in a pond. So every 1,000 fish weighed 50 pounds. Later, when you sample the same 1,000 fish, you get 250 pounds per 1,000 fish. So this is the final weight, the initial weight. This is the amount of food that you fed your fish. You convert tons to pounds and you add it to the extra amount of pounds, and that's the total amount of feed that was fed. What is the feed conversion ratio? So just bearing in mind now that the feed conversion ratio is the amount of feed that was fed over the weight gain of the fish, right? So step one, convert all feed weight to one unit, which is pounds. So you want to convert that 10 tons into pounds instead of having two units, right? So 1 ton is 2,000 pounds. So 10 tons is 10 by 2, 20,000 pounds, right? And they was feeding it 10 tons plus 1,600 pounds. So you add that 1,600 pounds to the 20,000 pounds you had before. So you get 21,600 pounds of feed being fed in total to your fish. So you fed your fish 21,600 pounds of feed. And it went from 50 pounds for every 1,000 fish to 250 pounds for every 1,000 fish. So 21,600 pounds caused an increase of an average 200 pounds, right? So basically what you want to do is determine the weight gain of fish for this period. So the final weight can be calculated using two methods. Average fish weight by number of fish to give you a total weight. So the average fish weight to start with was 0.25 pounds by the total amount of fish. Remember, we started this is when we stocked it. Remember, we said that each fish was weighing 0.25 pounds. And in total, the pond had 67,500 pounds. So the total weight of all the fish was 16,785 pounds. Okay? The alternative calculation is to basically multiply the total amount of fish divided by the 1,000 fish and multiply by 250. Right? You will get the same amount with respect to the total weight. I prefer to use the first calculation because it's much simpler, right? Because we know the initial amount of fish that we stock and we know the initial weight. So it's very straightforward to multiply the initial weight by the total amount to give you the total weight. Yeah. So step 3, the initial weight of the fish was 67,500 over 1,000 by 50 pounds, right? And we got 3,375 pounds. Now we determine the feed conversion ratio using the formula amount of feed fed over final weight minus initial weight. So the total amount of feed, like what I highlighted to you all before, was 21,600 pounds. The final weight was 16,875 pounds, and the initial weight was 3,375 pounds. So when you subtract this and you divide it into the 21,600 pounds, you get 1.6. And this is a feed conversion ratio, 1.6. So we went through and you saw exactly how we got all these figures. The amount of feed fed, well, we knew that from before, the final weight and the initial weight. So we had calculated the initial weight to be 3,375 pounds, and we calculated the final weight to be 16,875 pounds, and this was the total amount of feed that was fed. When you work that into the formula, you get 1.6, and your feed conversion ratio is 1.6. Right? So that's how you calculate FCR. Everybody is clear with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, excellent.
We have we'll have this recording as well to go back over and probably just change up the figures and do some examples on.
Yes. And that actually gonna be one of your assignments. So I will give you some random stocking and stuff like that. And you will work up some feed conversion ratios and stocking and those things for me. Yeah, but you usually
I figured that much now. That is why I asked that, so I could go back over the recording and do it.
Yeah. So I'll send that. So that's why I waited to so I want to send out the assignment something over this weekend. So that's why I waited to cover this. So I could basically just give you something nice to do with those calculations. Right. And this will really help you too. In case you ever want to get into aquaculture or anything, you would have you would basically know it well on how you go about doing those things. Yeah. And even so, you have a farmer now, because in AGRI, you'll have people who having questions, like plenty farmers and you might know, like friends and thing, and they just randomly growing fish and they want to make money from it. You could just show them a calculation and just help them work with that. And trust me, that's a guideline into really determining your profits and thing, as opposed to just feeding your fish and hoping for the best. Yeah. So feed conversion ratios. Yeah, Jabez, agriculture in general. It is true. Even things like chickens and things is something very easy could apply to for chickens and for goats and all that thing. Thanks, Jabez. Right. So feed conversion ratios. So the FCR means that during the growth time, the fish consumed an average of 1.6 pounds of feed to gain 1 pound in weight. So this is what it means, right? Right. So when we calculate the feed conversion ratio, it's not just a figure that we're going and write down and we note some and be like, hey, my FCR is 1.6. But what that 1.6 really means, how does it translate into anything? Like how does it affect your understanding your business operations or anything like that? So yes, we calculate what we feed conversion ratio is. But what's the real significance of that? All that means now is that during the growth time, the fish consumed on average 1.6 pounds of food to gain 1 pound in weight. And therein lies how it is calculated if you're going to be profitable or not. If your fish now is selling for $20 a pound, right? And the food is costing you $50. All right, let me say the food costing you $10 a pound, right? $10 a pound. And your fish selling for $20 a pound. So you're feeding 1.6 pounds of food, right? And the cost on a pound of food is $10, right? So on average, you spend about $16, right? That is even a rough example. $16 you're spending in feed to gain 1 pound of weight in your fish. And that 1 pound selling for $20. So basically, you're spending $16 to make $20. But this $20 is gross profit, not net profit. You have to minus the $16 in feed. So now you remain with $4. So basically, the profit you're making from your fish is $4 at the end of your growth period. If you harvest an hour. No, this is not how it is. Like this is an example. It don't be that low, right? But just showing you an example. So $4. So you're spending $16 to make $4 profit because you're selling your fish for $20. But that $4 is still at a minus electricity cost, depreciation cost, labor, water quality, testing, equipment, consumables. So all of those things you're doing your business plan, or you're doing your expenses, or you actually put a price tag to each one of those, so you know your total recurring expenses, your fixed expense, those types of things. And then now you could sit down and you could look at that and you could be like, but wait, when I minus out all my other expenses, it came up to $4. So that means I'm breaking even. So what I spend in terms of feed and other inputs, I'm making in terms of profit. And then when I check out my net profit, I'm making nothing, like I'm breaking even. So it don't make any sense that I do this, I go into this species. I don't make sense I go into this aquaculture production because I'm not making any money at the end of the day. I'm breaking even, I'm not losing, man, I'm making. But however, you could sit down, you could look at them figures now, and you could be like, wait, I'm making $10 profit because after I minus all the expenses and the cost of the feed, you're making $10 profit. All right. And then from there, you could project your business goals. You could say, hey, me as Jabez, I don't want to work for nobody. I want to make an average $20,000 a month. Now, knowing you want to make $20,000 a month, and every fish you're making $10 net profit, you can divide that $20,000 by 10 and determine how much fish you need to grow out. And then depending on how much fish you need to grow out, you know the size of your facility, the size of tanks, your stocking density, how much area you need, and you could plan your whole business now. Everything is like everything is like crystal clear to you now. Now you could sit down now and you could back calculate now and you could determine everything with respect to your size of facility, the size of tanks you need, the quantity of fish you need to grow out to give you that $20,000 a month. Because you know why? When you know how to calculate feed conversion ratio, you could know your efficiency of your feed that you're using, which is one of the most variable costs in your production. Everything else you factor in and you determine your whole business right there. That is how you go about calculating your business. And as And as an agriculture professional, this is how you're supposed to be approaching agriculture. When people out there say they're doing agriculture and people say they're aquaculture farmers, define to me what an aquaculture farmer is? Putting fish in a tank and then throwing some food and then growing it out and selling it, and we even know if you're making $5, $10, or $0, it's not aquaculture business. That is hobbyist. We don't do this thing for hobby. You understand? When you're doing this thing, is business, is big business. And when you go abroad, trust me, when you go in those facilities and see how it is they do their business, everything they have software, Excel spreadsheets, everything calculating. You need to know what you're doing. And you could do this and apply this to any field of agriculture. This is how we make agriculture a business and not just a profitable hobby. And people need to get this in the brain. Right, so good. Okay, so how do you account for all the types of feed used? Do you calculate FCR for each type of feed? Yes, Siobhan. If you want to get right, so remember I said depending on the stage of growth of your fish, you will be feeding it a different type of food in terms of protein content, etc. But the cost will also vary as well. So for the period that you're using a particular type of feed, you do your FCR calculations to determine how much money you're spending during that time. Yeah. So you will have a good idea at the end if you use multiples, sizes of feed and that comes at different costs. So you just keep it in stages and then you add the total and you will get the total amount that you're spending on food. Right. So again, these are some ideas on crumble are expensive. Right. So Shivan's speaking about something called crumble, right, in the chat. Crumble is where you feed fish at the very juvenile stages. It's a very, very fine form of the fish food, and it's the highest in protein. So the cost is usually the highest, right? This is the reason why UV is about to explore on using insects as a source of protein and different, so we can reduce that feed cost because feed prices going up, right? And just about everything. The cost of inputs on almost everything going up, right? Including fish food and things. So, I mean, obviously the price will need to be adjusted, your final saleable price as well to accommodate for that increase in cost, right? So that's a little domino effect. But again, having a good idea on how much it costs you to produce a fish and stuff like that is extremely important. So what are some of the factors that affects how, in addition to what we spoke about, affect how your fish convert feed, right? Water quality, pond conditioning, predatory control. If you have predators hunting in your pond, it attacking your fish, they will be stressed, they wouldn't eat as well. The type of fish food, again, right, will affect how the fish feeds on it and how it's converted. The method of fish harvesting, grading, and sorting, all of these things negatively, it stresses the fish, so it affects your feed conversion ratios and different. So any kind of stressor in the aquatic environment where your fishes are will have a negative effect on your feed conversion ratio. So any questions before we get into the second section? Okay, good. Right, so we'll get into this one time. Harvesting and transporting fish. So, as we will be well aware, there are many different types of aquaculture systems: pond culture, tank culture, cage culture, etc., etc. All of these different aquatic culture system type environments are basically designed differently. So naturally, the techniques that we will utilize to harvest fish from these different systems will vary, right? So the harvesting techniques will be specific to the type of aquatic system that you utilize to grow your species, right? And that's fair enough common sense. If you have a fish tank, go and pull a seine inside of there, you might use a big net, you might just drain the tank, we have different options. So let me look at earthen ponds. So fish cultured in earthen ponds are usually seine harvested. So we use these big seines and we drag it inside of the ponds and we basically harvest our fish, right? So large ponds require special equipment to lift fish to the hauling truck. The hauling truck is basically the truck that will take your fish from point A to point B after you harvest it. So there are special equipment called live car or a suck and a boom truck, right? So basically, in real big fish ponds, we talking about no little bit of fish. Harvesting fish via hand is uneconomical, it's not feasible because of the large quantities of fish. So you drag these big seines throughout these fish ponds and then you use trucks with cranes on top of it. They call it a boom truck that could basically hook the net after I catch all them fish from any ponds and lift it out because it's very heavy and it's large quantities. So again, large ponds will require these types of trucks, these boom trucks. A live car or a sock is basically a net, right? For holding the fish after you've seen it. So let me say you're seeing the fish inside of here, right? So you had the big pond and you're seeing all the fish, but you need to keep them enclosed until the truck or the boom could come and take the fish into your transport. So you have these big nets that you keep within the pond. So when you're seeing it, you just basically, it comes like a little container. You put it in a little container, right? So you have a big net and you just basically place the fish in the net until you're ready to harvest, take the fish out of the pond. Yeah, so it's like storage in the pond until you move them out. Yeah. Some species must be harvested in small amounts and gently handled to avoid mortality and external damage, which decreases the marketability. So again, depending on species, you may not opt to utilize something to commercially harvest all of them at the same time. You might want to do it slowly. Crayfish and prawns, for instance, and earthen ponds, just like this, a lot of crayfish and a lot of prawns are grown in those types of conditions. For those types of species, you wouldn't typically use a big net to a big seine and just seine everything into one and then just get something because it could damage the pincers, the legs, and and these things will affect its marketability. You want to go and buy a crayfish and then you're seeing two legs and one pincer, that kind of thing. You want a nice product. So for those types of species, they would use like baited fish traps in your pond. So you set them and you capture them via that means. So that way they ain't suffering any abrasion, any physical contact, anything like that. So you get them whole, live, intact, that you can transport to whatever location you have in mind, right? If you go again to harvest crayfish hunting with these big boom trucks, look at this net. Look at all this fish pack up in here. The fish will be fine, depending. Right, but if you have crayfish in here, chances are all them crayfish in the middle of that net going to die because they'll be suffocating, they'll be pressed against each other. They don't really, they're not as tolerant as regular fish, right? So again, it's a bit species dependent as well too. And when you're harvesting fish, salt is also used, right, to avoid excess stress. We spoke about this salt being used because it helps. Remember when I mentioned when we did diseases and I said salt, when you increase the concentration of salt around freshwater fishes to around 3 to 5 parts per thousand, it kind of helps regulate the osmotic pressure and the osmoregulation. So it relieves stress a bit as well. So when you're transporting fish, sometimes you can use salt as well to keep the fish as calm and as stress-free as possible. Because some locations you may need to transport it to live. In some restaurants, something they have aquariums, something within the restaurants. So you go and you see a live crayfish or a live lobster or a live fish, and you choose what you want, and the chef will take it live and prepare it for you. And these are creative ways to increase your marketing and different things like that. When you're seeing your fish, you're choosing it, yeah, that kind of thing. So you may need to keep your organisms alive. So there are different harvesting situations and options as well too. So there are 3 harvesting situations to consider. Partial harvesting exists where only part of the fish are removed. So sometimes you may not want to remove that entire pond one time. We're going to do it 50,000 pounds of fish in one day. So you may need to take it over several days. Like my cousin, them have a chicken farm, right? They do broilers. And usually depending on when the company comes to take chicken, they may opt to come and take all on one day and they will just harvest out, they'll just basically harvest all the pens. Or sometimes they come and they take batches. So they take like half or they take a third and they do that over a week or like 2 weeks. So like usually we are over. Yeah. So same thing for fish. You could do a partial harvest where you take just a little bit of the fish at a time. In addition to that, the pond could also be topped, right? So this means where larger market size fish are selectively harvested from ponds with mixed fish sizes. So if you have a pond with about 5 different sizes of fish, what you could do, you could harvest the big fish and you could leave the rest, right? And then the next bigger fish after that, when it reaches the harvestable size, they harvest those and, in a sequential manner. So when you have mixed size of fishes in a pond, you could do that kind of harvesting. Or you could clean crop everything. So that's when they basically come and just harvest out everything and remove it one time and then restock, etc. The only way in pond culture to reliably harvest all the fish from the pond is to drain it completely, right? So this involves a combination of draining and sealing. Yeah. So when you're using seines to harvest a fish, it can either be knotless or it can be knotted. The implications: knotless are much less abrasive on your fish as opposed to knotted. Depending on the species of fish that you're growing, you may opt to use knotless seines or knotted seines. Yeah, because it may cause abrasion or it may not cause abrasion. So say in small ponds, you could use little hand seines and you could just pull it in this. So you notice this kind of oxbow type circular fashion. So typically one person will go on end, walk the seine along the edge and then come around and then both together will pull the seine. There's a line to the top with the cork on top, right? And this keeps the seine afloat from the top. And in the bottom, there's a lead line and this drags to the bottom. Normally, when you're pulling this, so you see there's 2 poles on the end, so you hold on to those poles and you pull, right? When you pull, you slant the bottom of this pole inwards a bit, so it creates a kind of cup inside of the net. And when you do that and you pull that to the bank, all the fish swims in the middle of the net, and you basically pull it up and you harvest the fish from it. And when you have large ponds, of course, you need to have machinery. So like, you see how these guys here were pulling this little seine here? Right. So they could pull out their hand, it's not that big. However, when you have real large ponds like hectares and things, and you have real big nets, you have machinery with these rollers and things on it that will actually pull and wind in. So these guys are just guiding the net and it pulling, wrapping up, and it concentrates on all the fish in the net while it pulls up. Okay, and then you have your boom truck now that you will place all the fish inside of, and the boom truck will pick it up and take it out. And again, what we know for normal aquaculture tanks, like a recirculating type aquaculture system, you could use a normal hand net. And you could just easily drain those tanks to the end and you could just basically hand fish them out. You don't really need to have anything as elaborate as what you will have there, because you won't typically have a typical tank system with that is a hectare big. It will be much smaller units that's easier to harvest with simple hand nets. Yeah. So transporting fish live. Well, transporting fish, you could basically do this via live hauling or basically moving them alive. So again, you can add salt to reduce stress. So 0.05 to 1% salt solution, which is on average 1 to 5 ppt for freshwater fish. So that reduces stress and helps with osmoregulation and things. So fish is less stressed. Now, especially fish that you're using that you need to keep alive. Like let me say transporting fingerlings or high-priced fish that you want to put like broodstock and thing. You want to make sure that those fish are stress-free as possible. So you would probably want to utilize salt and these techniques when you're transporting those, as opposed to just using as opposed to just harvesting fish that you're going to use for food, right? So let me just say you harvest out a whole tank and send it at a processing facility. You may not want to go through all of this hassle of salting and all them things, because you're going to harvest that fish relatively soon. But things like brood stock and them kind of thing, you want to make sure that it's on top health, top condition, etc. Adding salt also consumes energy, maintaining osmotic balance. Again, very important for when you're dealing with higher priced fish that you need to keep alive. When you're transporting fish, you can also use anesthetic like MS222, right? So MS222, this is a anesthetic for fish, right? So you add a little bit within the system and it kind of sedate the fish to a certain extent where they wouldn't move up and they wouldn't do anything. So you could safely move them from point A to point B. Yeah. MS222, when you're dealing with food fish, right? So just like how you're using pesticides and things on plants, right? And it have something called a post-harvest interval, where when you use a pesticide, you can harvest that crop until a certain time has elapsed, so that it will completely be out of the system of the plant or the fruit or the crop or the vegetable, whatever, right? So these anesthetics like MS222, it has a certain amount of time, a withdrawal period before you can consume your food. So call it your post-harvest interval is around 21 days if you use this anesthetic before you could consume that fish. You want to make sure when you're transporting fish, you maintain non-stressful temperatures. So you're acclimatized before stocking for transportation. Cool water slows metabolic rate and increases oxygen saturation. So sometimes people actually put like little ice packs and different things, not to freeze your water, but just to keep that, like we say, you have them in bags and a cooler. You want to keep that environment in there as cool and as ambient for that species as possible. So your ammonia will increase in a bag because the fish will produce ammonia. Remember, now you have fish and being transported. So it's not a large volume of water. So whatever ammonia the fish produce, it could cause the ammonia to spike fairly easy. So you want to make sure your pH is around 7 to 7.5. Because remember, pH affects the toxicity of ammonia. So you want a pH that will allow the ammonia to exist when it is produced in a non-toxic form. So a pH of around 7 to 7.5 should be maintained when transporting fish. And I could almost guarantee you the majority of people don't know about it. Carbon dioxide will accumulate, but will remove with sufficient aeration. So like if you're transporting in open containers and things like that, you could aerate the water, and if when carbon dioxide is produced, it will be removed as soon as it's produced. So fish are usually transported in bags, especially when you're going from continent to continent in planes, right? So typically I have fish stocked in 3mm polyethylene bags and styrofoam shipping boxes, right? So remember, styrofoam is a good insulator. So like we use a little roti box and thing for, just keep your roti cool, right? So you keep your fish water cool in them bags when you're transporting. So the water quality parameters of water going into the bag must be ideal. Of course, that is just common sense. Rate of change in water quality in the bag is affected by the weight and size of fish being transported and the duration of transport. And that again is common sense. So your water quality, if you have plenty fish, right, meaning the weight, the biomass is more, or the fish is bigger, obviously they will produce more waste and they will alter your water quality more than a smaller fish. And the longer you keep your fish in the bag, the more your water quality will deteriorate. Before you transport fish, do not feed the fish for at least 24 hours. This is to ease stress on the fish, for the fish not to produce excessive amounts of ammonia, different things like that. So keep the fish off feed for at least 24 hours prior to transporting. And this goes for like when people, like if you're going to purchase fish from, like if I know somebody is coming to buy fingerlings from me, I would typically not not feed them. So if I have the choice of feeding them right away, I will not. I will wait till the fish are gone and the person takes them and then advise them to feed them. Wait 24 hours after, even after somebody purchases the fish or the fish reaches the location, you wait a while before you feed them as well, so the fish get properly acclimatized. Yeah, but especially for transporting, you don't want to feed them for at least 24 hours before. Ice gel packs or heat packs, dependent, could be used to keep temperatures from changing significantly depending on the species and the weather where the box is being shipped. So this was just a table showing you some water quality in bags, right? So these are some water quality parameter ranges for freshwater fish. The tolerance, again, of these parameters is species dependent. What may be good for one species may be bad for another. So things like dissolved oxygen, carbon dioxide, pH, total ammonia, nitrogen, they're telling you what are the acceptable ranges for when you're transporting. So like DO 5 to 15 ppm, carbon dioxide less than 5, pH 6.5 to 9.5, those types of things. So you can go through these tables when I send the slides to you all as well. So these are some optional additives they could use when you're transporting fish, right? So they could use oxygen. So you could provide oxygen via bubbles. You could use oxygen tanks and you could inject it into the bag. You could add salt, aids in osmoregulation. So you could keep about the concentration to about 3 ppt, 3 parts per thousand, or 3 milligrams per liter, right? So it don't really have an effect on the appearance and behavior of the fish. You could use acryflavine. This is an antimicrobial at 7 milligrams per liter. So it prevents poor appearance and mortality, those types of things. So you could go through, these are some optional things. Clove oil is a sedative, regular clove oil. So some persons, hobbyists, use clove oil as well too if you want to sedate your fish. Right? So you could use, because MS222, it's illegal, right? To have on your own, you can't transport it. MS222 is something methyl trichine, methyl, some sulfonate. It's very similar to cocaine. It's like a relative, quote unquote, a relative to cocaine. And if you do a test for cocaine and a test for MS222, it will almost give you the same compound, more or less, the reading. So it's a ship MS222. If you have to travel with it, you have to get a permit. Yeah. So it's hard to get. You can't just get that just so, right? We used to supply through at the vet school. I don't think that service is no longer available. So other than that, it's difficult. Clove oil, I think it may be a substitute. So other considerations in transporting fish, cost of the fish, behavior of the fish, right? So again, the behavior will dictate the best way in which to transport that fish. Size of the fish, again, will determine the best way to transport the fish. Individually packing fish will help eliminate water quality problems if a fish dies. But you wouldn't individually pack 5,000 fingerlings if you're transporting it. But if you're transporting 5 koi breeders, you will individually package it. Yeah, because they want to lose all of that in a batch. And that brings me to the end of this presentation. Do we have any questions or comments?
I have one related.
So
Uh-huh.
on my side.
Everything good, right?
Yeah, I have one related question.
All right. Yeah, Shivan.
Yeah, the Casinus, right? Casinus is breed the same way like Rosenberg.
No, Rosenbergi is more that Rosenbergi you have to manipulate that salinity and thing, and it's go through a slightly different life stage development than the Casinus.
Casinus is breed in freshwater then.
There's breed in freshwater. And 100%, I done a paper on it when I did my program in Florida. But for the light of me, boy, I can't find. I uploaded it, and I think I lost. I don't know, somewhere around. I think it's on my next laptop that I need to pull the hard drive out of. All right. I do real research for that, but there's very little information on cast sinus. Very, nothing that we could just use and commercialize.
Oh,
Yeah, but it's something that I'm working on as well too, as part of my research project.
the PhD project.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, man. All right, nice. All right, guys. So that is that. I will upload this lecture. I'll try to upload this during the course of today, and I'll send you the link for it, and I will PDF this and send it to you as well. With respect to your assignments and stuff, those should be sent over the weekend, and I'll send all the guidelines and everything for that as well. If you all have any other questions with your assignments and stuff, you can feel free to message me either privately or through the chat if you think you want to send it through the chat. Yeah, we could work from there. All right, nice. All right, guys. So you all enjoy the rest of your day, and we shall keep in touch.
Absolutely.
All right.